Hi, everybody. Welcome to our first episode of Device and Conquer, the podcast where we dive into the world of medical regulation. And trust us, it's not nearly as dry as it sounds. I'm Michelle, a regulatory strategist, and I'm knee deep in all of the regulations and guidance documents that are or are not coming out from a variety of regulatory agencies.
And I'm Ty, your curious co-navigator through the maze of guidance documents, regulatory classifications, baffling FDA decisions, all the things. Don't worry, we're here to make sense of it all so you don't fall asleep reading the regs.
And just so you guys know that might be watching this as a video cast instead of a audio podcast, Ty and I, just purely by accident in the mental Wi-Fi between us, ended up wearing the exact same shirt today.
That is true. This is not planned.
So we're here, we're in the Wi-Fi together, and like she said, she's my co-navigator, and I think that this just proves it, even
Yeah.
energetically.
We're here to do the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And we're here to tell you what a medical device is. So Michelle, tell us, what is a medical device?
Well, you normally think of things that are more obvious, like maybe a scalpel or a pacemaker that has a obvious medical purpose. But if you take that idea of medical purpose and go further into the definition, you're also considering things like whether it diagnoses, if it treats, if it's monitoring the condition, supporting or replacing a body function, and even helping with reproduction or preventing it. But one thing I see is that people don't like, especially this definition hits the wearables world really hard about where is that definition between a medical purpose and public, like maybe a general wellness. Like think about your smartwatch.
Yeah. And so for those devices, that medical purpose is really all about treating or diagnosing a disease, monitoring. That's where wearables get in trouble because biometrics can ride the line. And like you said, supporting or replacing a body function.
Mhm. So some stuff that makes it a little tricky is that in one country you can be regulated as a medical device, and under the rules and decision making of the other country, you might be considered not a device at all. Some you might be considered combination products. Some you might be considered just a drug product. You might have to get more than one regulatory agency involved that has jurisdictions in a variety of jurisdictions over your product configuration.
Yeah. And so this is particularly challenging, right? So what's the definition of a medical device and what are medical devices in the US isn't a global approach. So when you do make medical device products, you have to have kind of these individual assessments, and the classifications can also be all over the place, right? So contacts are a class 2 device here, and they can be higher classified in Europe because of the risk associated with your eyes.
Mhm.
Same with radiation. The US is home to a lot of radiation medicine. And so here it's actually class 2 in a lot of different ways. And almost nowhere else in the world is that true. It's all highest classification, highest risk for radioactive treatments.
Mhm.
So there's so much nuance and so much to know to do this right that we're going to talk you through a lot of it in this podcast. Don't get overwhelmed. Um, but it's a really interesting thing because there's so many things that people also take for granted that are actually medical devices they don't even think about, right?
Yeah.
Like
How
tongue
about your
depressors,
toothbrush or dental floss? For one.
dental flosses,
Mhm.
uh, tongue depressors,
Mhm.
adult diapers, exercise weights, depending on how you phrase that, they can be medical devices. There is an FDA product code for
Mhm.
that.
There sure is, if they're to treat obesity or prevent weight gain. Isn't that
Yeah.
wild?
Yeah. It it gets so nuanced so quick.
Mhm.
But why do we have all these requirements? Why do we have all of these regulations, Michelle?
Ty, I say that a lot of times it's the governments gave industry enough rope. They had a lot of freedom to navigate within the regulations, and the governments put it on industry to be accountable and to follow the things that they committed to when they said, "Hey, FDA, I'm making medical devices, and these are the ones I'm making." But then they release products that cause some sort of public safety issue or efficacy issue. And so you can look back over the history of of regulation, particularly within the FDA, and see how different public events where there were a lot of deaths and public outcry, the FDA stepped up and gave all new regulation or more stringent regulation.
That segment. The Jungle has the best quote about when if you give industry light regulations, they can't really stop police. Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle, which historically prompted the Food and Drug Act. There's a whole history on it. We could do a whole podcast on it, but it was a fictional story. And what Upton Sinclair intended, this is the quote that he said was, "I aimed for the public's heart and by accident hit it in the stomach." And that is what this story that was supposed to be so emotional, and it is, if you've read it, it's very sad. That's not what people took away from it. What people took away from it was that people were canning rat meat and calling it beef, and
Hmm.
that they
And
were
all that was really happening
and
too.
all of it was really happening.
Hmm.
I mean, he interviewed the Chicago meat packing plant, you
Hmm.
know, people that were working in these
Hmm.
facilities, and I mean, there was pink slime, there was people's fingers falling in canners, there was mold, there were rats
Hmm.
falling in the canning meat. It was disgusting.
Yeah.
And
And
that's really what drove
yeah.
regulatory change, not the emotional appeal of this immigrant family, unfortunately.
Yeah. So all that we just talked about in the jungle was around food, and that's when the FDA upped the regulations required for food standards.
Yep.
So some of the things that on the medical device side that drove regulation is one, for instance, like the Dawkins Shield. This is a IUD, intrauterine device that came out in the 70s, and they promised a safe alternative to birth control, pills, something that changes your body, hormones or chemistry. So it was but what happened is that it caused infections,
Yeah.
infertility, and even death, because its design funneled bacteria straight into the uterine wall. And first, fun fact, the IUDs also initially, and sometimes even now, can embed themselves in the uterine wall. And you have to either get them surgically removed, or sometimes they even burst work through the uterine wall and end up in one of your other organs.
Yeah, I was gonna mention, yeah, uterine perforation with that bacteria was really bad
Hmm.
with these 1970s shields, and it drove a lot of regulation and a lot of control. When you look at the the regulations around pregnancy, birth control, they're quite strict, and they should be, right? Like, this is an important topic, women's health. Um, that drove a lot of regulation. The metal on metal hemp implants, they drove a lot of regulation too because of all of the toxic
Hmm.
metal debris that were being shed into patients. It really drove
Oh,
a lot of
yeah.
what the
Over.
requirements for long-term implants were going to
Hmm.
be because it wasn't well known and materials weren't really studied in the extensivity that they are now.
Hmm.
And now, how often do we say, hey, we use biocompatible materials? Do we really need to do any testing?
Hmm.
And we hear that all the time, and that's just not the case. FDA takes it so serious because there's such an impact for long term implants.
Well, and the FDA says, okay, yeah, maybe that material has been commonly used for decades, but it hasn't been used in the same application or the same duration for use that you're trying to do it now.
Yeah.
So that's another area where we see, regulations change as information and long-term results become available.
So, yeah, there's a lot of historical events where products unfortunately hurt people and they
Hmm.
drove regulations. And that brings us kind of where we are now. So, we have gone through a huge regulatory drive in the last, I don't know, 50 years, right? So, we've
Hmm.
had the substantial equivalence and FDA come out. We've had good manufacturing practices come out, 21 CFR 820, which is now even being updated to what is called the Quality Management System Regulation. If I'm saying all these words and they don't mean anything but gibberish to you,
But
do not
alphabet soup.
worry. We will walk you through all of them and talk you through all of them. This is just a start and kind of introduction to what we talk about and what our day to day is. But the really important part is to know that people were harmed, the government made changes, and now industry has to follow the letter of the law. But
Hmm.
who is in charge? Who keeps industry accountable? Well,
Hmm.
that's one in the US, the FDA. But kind of what are some other
Well,
regulatory authorities?
and to clarify, FDA's is Food and Drug Administration. And like Ty and I were talking about how the history evolved, it's like
In
and
parentheses,
devices
in medical devices, in
and
parentheses.
biologics, combination products, and
Lasers.
laboratory developed tests. And so basically, if it is a medical product for any purpose through any mode of application, that falls within the FDA in the United States. But Europe has a really fun and fascinating regulatory structure involving what's called a notified body and competent authorities. So, Ty, let's discuss a little bit about that.
Yeah. So FDA, you kind of have one group that's in charge. The EU has kind of come to this agreement of each individual member of the European Union has what's called a competent authority, which is kind of like their FDA. But because of an agreement, they allow third party companies called notified bodies to review your technical documentation and your quality management system to let you commercialize throughout the European Union. So basically, the competent authorities look at the notified bodies and say, hey, you're qualified to make these decisions kind of on our behalf for certain types of products. And then industry works with the notified body instead of the competent authority for most cases to get their products cleared. But the
Mhm.
competent authority has the ultimate jurisdiction.
Yeah. And so, if you think about this potential nightmare, you've every country in the European Union has at least one competent authority, if not several. There are, and then these notified bodies, those are private for-profit industries. And so it's the cost and the fees to get into Europe are extreme compared to that in the FDA. And then even though you're working with one notified body, that one notified body is accountable to all the competent authorities in Europe. So, everything rolls downhill. And so just the amount of things that are rolling down from the commission to the competent authorities and then to these for-profit regulatory agencies for notified bodies um, adds not only a lot of expense, but a lot of complications in even understanding what the expectations are because there's so many people with their hands in the pot.
Yep.
Mhm.
And then, every government has kind of their own version of that. UK has MHRA, um, Canada has Health Canada. There's all kinds of configurations of this, but we talk about the US and EU primarily because a lot of countries will accept one of those as a kind of gold sticker. Um, and they just tend to be the largest of markets. So, on this podcast, we're going to talk about a lot of different topics. FDA in a deeper level, EU in a deeper level, what actually is a regulation, all of the good stuff. But
Hmm.
before we do that, since we talked about what is a medical device, let's talk about, you know, a real or ridiculous circumstance. We're going to describe some medical devices to you, and you have to tell us in the comments what you think is a real medical device, or is this just a ridiculous made up thing?
Hmm. And then we'll give you the answers at the start of our next podcast. So let's start. What about a smart spoon that helps Parkinson's patients eat?
The next is a mood ring that detects cancer.
A knee implant that tracks how you move.
I might have given this one away if you listened closely, but exercise equipment, weight, dumbbells, straps,
A diaper that notifies a phone when it's soiled.
or a focus band that monitors your cognitive drift.
Mhm. So, like we said, put the answer in the chat, and for extra credit, put in why you think it is a medical device or not. And then we will see you next time.
Yeah, if you liked today's episode, subscribe, share it with your QA or regulatory team, leave a review, and come back for next week, MDR, more than just the red tape, where we journey to the EU world of regulation. No passport needed.